Hi, thank you for joining today's event, Beyond the Green Screen. It's sponsored by Iowa Work-Based Learning Coordinators and hosted by the Iowa Intermediary Network. I'm going to turn it over to Ann.
Thank you so much for joining us. We have a great panelist group with us today from Iowa PBS to share their expertise. We have Cameron and Deb, and I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves, tell a little bit about how they got to their current position and really what sparked that interest in video production or producing and all that great stuff behind the green screen. So I'll turn it over to Cameron if you want to give us a little insight of what your current position is and how you got to where you are.
Yeah. So my name is Cameron McCoy. I am a producer, video producer at Iowa PBS. Let's see. So I grew up in Atlantic, Iowa, which is in the southwest corner of the state, and kind of immediately fell in love with like audio production, video production, something along those lines. And I thought maybe I wanted to get into that. So I went ahead and went to college at Northwest Missouri State University and got a degree in broadcasting, which allowed me to do both audio production and video production. Went down to Kansas City and I worked there for a few years in freelance film and video production, and worked on a variety of different like commercial stuff for like H&R Block, Walmart, Sonic, just tons of different like commercial work. While I was down there, I got a Master of Education degree and was planning on actually going into education. But I found the job at Iowa PBS that was actually in the education department at first. And so I got the job. We moved back to Iowa and worked in education for a while. But because I had the production background, Deb Herbold actually was the one who hired me to become an actual producer director for Iowa PBS. And for the last 9 years now, I've been making videos all over the state of Iowa.
Thank you so much for joining us, to Cameron, for that introduction. Nice segue into Deb, since she's the one that hired you and brought you here. So we'll turn it over to Deb to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Deb Herbold. I've worked at Iowa PBS for over 20 years. I was a theater kid growing up and went to Drake University and knew right away I wanted to work in television. So I got a degree in radio TV with a minor in marketing, and started out in news, which there's a local channel here called WHO TV. Worked my way up through the ranks there, and then decided I wanted a little bit more meaning in what I produced. So I came to Iowa PBS. They had a job opening there, and was a producer, became an executive producer. And work with awesome people there. We got to produce the Iowa State Fair coverage and Iowa Ingredient, and even got to create a kids show that we worked on for a long time. So our jobs involve a lot of different things, which we love. We love coming to work, sometimes not knowing what's going to happen. And that's exciting for us. It's definitely not a job where you sit at a desk. So that's what I love most about it. And I get to work with awesome people like Cameron McCoy.
Great. Sounds like a great teamwork atmosphere at Iowa PBS. And again, thanks to Iowa PBS, they have given us some videos to share with our participants today, because we've heard a lot of terminology kind of used already in this segment. And we really, to help students who are looking at this as a career pathway, kind of help understand what those terms mean. So the first one we're going to look at is the producer, and kind of what does that mean? What does that job kind of entail? So we're going to show this to you real quick and learn more about what it's like to be a producer.
So I'm a producer, and one of my jobs is to create the production, and the production is multifaceted. There are so many different layers to a production. Not only do I have to plan everything and, like make sure that I'm going to be telling a good story, but then there's all these like logistical elements that we have to think about as well. Everything from the location of where we're going to be recording, the people who I'm going to be talking with, making sure that my camera operator has everything they need, making sure that the audio will sound okay in that particular location. All of these facets go into creating the best looking product that we can possibly make. I get to wear multiple hats. Like during the Iowa State Fair, one of the things I get to do is kind of go out on my own solo and just try to collect as much footage as possible to create a story. But then I might also work on a production for All-State Music Festival or a cooking show where it's a giant production with many people and each person has a particular role in order to create the best looking product. And that's what I like about my job, is I get to do both like these larger productions that require multiple videographers, a technical director, a sound mixer, and all that stuff. Or it might just be, you know, one person or two people out in the field collecting images. At the end of the day, storytelling is still the key thing, and that will always stay the same. When I first started back in 2004, we were still using larger on-the-shoulder cameras, and which are called like these EFP, ENG type cameras, your traditional news gathering cameras. And as technology has gotten smaller and the cameras have gotten better, now we use everything from like little DSLR cameras, like point and shoot type cameras, to your cell phone. And as we move forward into the future, those tools will still change and continue to change. I don't even know what those tools will look like. But at the end of the day, I know that the storytelling will still be key.
It's great insight to how the producer is really in charge of kind of setting the stage, making sure everything's available and ready for the production piece of it. So it's a great insight to that. The next one is our videographer video that, again, Iowa PBS has allowed us to show to everybody that's joining us today. So we'll take a look at that to gain a little better perspective of how it's different, or a different role from a producer, editor, audio, and all of that. So we'll turn to that video now.
The beautiful thing about living in today's media world is that there are multiple types of cameras, and each one of those cameras have a different job to create the best looking production. So if, let's say, I have, my subject is like a race car driver, I can't use a giant big camera inside the cockpit of his car or her car, but I might use something like a small GoPro or an action camera or something like that in order to get a point of view that you might not be able to get with this traditional big camera. The same thing with, like, there might be a shot where I want to follow my subject down the hallway and I want to make it glide and almost feel like they're floating. I might use what we call a gimbal, which is just like a little stabilizer with a little camera on it, and it balances everything out so that I'm able to create like this floaty shot, which is a completely different point of view than your traditional thing, which might be just a camera locked down on a tripod.
That was another great video. Again, thanks to Iowa PBS for allowing us to show these. Our next one is kind of a behind the scenes look at the editor. But before we go to that, Deb has some input for that video.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something real quick on the videographer job. A lot of the videographer job is technical, but there's so many artistic things to it too. So Cameron is a shooter. He is a videographer and a producer. And so Cameron might have some interesting perspective real quick on how you have to kind of think a little differently when you're doing both of those different jobs, right, Cam?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the cool thing is like when I was growing up, like you still had to use like a film camera. It didn't matter if it was like I mean, there was video cameras, but like photography at its core was still, you know, shot on film. And now we have like these incredible devices. Like I still can't get my head around how amazing and awesome this is. And this is an incredible device that allows you to do literally the work that I do. We use these, iPhones, Android phones in order to produce content. So I guess at the end of the day, while yes, we might have like these big, expensive cameras that, do have an incredible image, the best tool is whatever you have in your hands. And that applies to photography, videography, audio recording, all of that. And just use whatever device you have. So if you have the passion, if you have the bug to tell a story visually, nothing is stopping you in 2022 to pick up your phone, another small device, and create stories that way.
And
Great
too,
insight.
I think kids everywhere are videographers right now. I mean, on social media, they've become really good at it. So if you find yourself being able to tell a good story with videography using your phone or whatever, it might be a cool career path for you.
Are there better devices to use for more of the action versus maybe a still or a relatively event or something that you were capturing that was more of a still setting? Is there a better tool for the student to kind of utilize for those different criteria?
There are, like, I would say, all these other things that go into like photography. And photography is really, videography at its core is photography, right? So the skills I would tell you that you should know are these things called composition, lighting, and framing. And this translates across the board. It doesn't matter if you're making a Hollywood production, an Iowa PBS thing, something on TikTok, or just a photo you're going to post to Instagram. So like lighting is key. Like that is the number one thing that I think is just so important and people should learn. Just look at the world around you and just see how that light interacts with a room and how like shadows kind of play within that. That's number one. That's something that you just have to develop, and you just start observing your world. And when you do that, you can see like, oh, this would actually be an interesting place to shoot, and I could record something here. And really at the tool, it doesn't really matter. It can be an iPhone, that's great. And it can be an amazing cinema camera, that's awesome too. But it's really about like, how do I frame that shot? How do I set my camera down to get this particular viewpoint? Those are the tools that are more like creative, and anybody can do that. It's just opening your eyes and observing the world around you.
And the feelings, I think, that go with that. A lot of times the videographer and the producer are working in tandem. What kind of feeling do you want here? You might bring out the drone and fly over the Les Hills because you want an awesome kind of, I don't know, a big feeling. And like Cameron says in the video, you might have cramped space. There's many kitchens that Cameron and I have shot in that are so tiny at a restaurant. And Cameron thankfully had a smaller camera, but oftentimes a videographer would have a big one. So it can be intrusive. Also in a classroom, if you're videotaping in a classroom, the less intrusive you can be, the smaller equipment you want. So we have a luxurious amount these days compared to decades ago, amount of equipment that we can choose to tell the story the way it needs to be told. It's really cool.
Very great insight. Back when I went to college, it was kind of the norm, the setup for our college TV set to have 3 cameras. Is that kind of still the aspect of more of that TV aspect, is to have the 3 cameras, or is that kind of changed with the times as well?
I mean, you can do a ton of television with 3 cameras, and if you're going to intercut between those. So like for a lot of our studio productions, anything from like the cooking program we did on Iowa Ingredient to a ballet or just a talking head show that we do in the studio. Normally that's like 3 cameras. Sometimes we might up it to 4 or 5 just to get wider coverage. But like a sporting event, you can cover with 3 cameras if you needed to.
Great, and maybe that's our segue into our next video, which is the editor. Using those 3 cameras, obviously you would capture, sometimes somebody in the control booth would be telling you which shot to take, but also having that editor look at different things as well. So we'll now show the editor video again from Iowa PBS.
An editor, you know, we call it a technical job, but there's a lot of creativity that goes into editing. There's a lot of decision making that you have to do as an editor, because you will be given sometimes an hour's worth of footage that needs to be condensed down into a 2-minute feature. So the job of an editor is to take all those key sound bites that will kind of lay out together in order to shape that story. And that storytelling process has so many other elements than just chopping, right? It's all about pacing and trying to create that narrative too, so your audience member doesn't get bored when they watch the end product. We at the station use Avid Media Composer, which is one of the industry standards. It's actually the first digital editing software that that Hollywood started using. So we're using like the big tools that Hollywood uses. But there are tons of other editing softwares out there that you can use. Everything from Final Cut to Adobe Premiere to Sony Vegas. They all do the exact same thing, which is just to chop up these elements to tell a story.
Editing is one of my favorite things. And at Iowa PBS, we have people whose only job is to edit. We call them production technicians. And sometimes they have a script like you saw in the video, or sometimes, like Cameron mentioned too, they'll be given a plop down, here's some footage and make it something like this, and they turn it into something. The most exciting time at Iowa PBS for our editors, the most stressful time, is Iowa State Fair time. We produce about 76 features in 10 days, and we only have 4 editors that work on that. So producers do a lot of editing themselves. And I will say some producers are great editors and some producers aren't. And an editor has to clean up that mess afterwards and make it polished and professional. So editing is totally storytelling, but you have to be really good at the technical part too. So you have to know the software, continue to learn, continue to read up on things that are new. There's updates to the software that you have to learn. I recently went from editing on Avid to editing on Adobe Premiere, and there are subtle differences there that you have to get used to. So I would say the editing job is kind of like the really cool thing that brings it all together. You know, the videographer doesn't edit, but the producer edits. And editing is just vital to what we do at Iowa PBS. It's a really cool job.
Yes, and I think the viewer recognizes that aspect of it too, because if you've watched any kind of maybe even a news report, and you'll have kind of the voiceover and the video will be playing, sometimes you'll notice that they'll repeat the video. So it's just kind of like those different things that you're watching for, and just to know that the person behind that had that ability to capture that kind of feeling to fit the narrative is a great piece to that. Our final video is about the audio engineer. So again, kind of the voice, we've talked about maybe the picture portion of it, but now the voice of telling the story. So we're going to play that video for you. Again, thanks to Iowa PBS.
One of the things that goes probably most unnoticed for any sort of production is the audio, but it's also, I would argue, the most important thing. You can forgive a bad image, but you will never forgive bad audio. If there's like a crackling microphone or it's distorted or anything like that. So that's actually one of the most important things in the post-production process here at Iowa PBS, is ensuring that the audio sounds as good as it possibly can. We use this program called Pro Tools. It's just called a digital audio workstation, and there are tons of different DAWs out there that you can use. Some are free and some are like the high-end things, but they all do the same thing, which is mixing the audio to balance it to make it as good as possible. Where we might mix in music with the natural audio that was collected during the actual production with the audio of an interview, and you kind of mix all those things together to sweeten the audio to make it sound as good as possible. At Iowa PBS, I think the most obvious job is the one that's the person who's in front of the camera, or a host, right? But there's a whole team of people who work behind the scenes, and a lot of whom maybe don't even want to be in front of the camera, or on camera at all. But they all are important. They all add to the production, whether that is the editing or the audio. So if you're a shy person and you don't want to be on the camera, but maybe you love working with the camera, there's tons of other jobs that you can do behind the scenes.
Such great insight. Now we've seen like different microphones and kind of the evolution of the microphone. How has that kind of helped with the audio production piece of that? I'll turn it to Cameron. Maybe he can give us a little insight about kind of the different microphones that are being used and why, and kind of the evolution of that.
Yeah. The technology of microphones has dramatically changed, even like within the last 20 years with the iPhone or the Android phone or whatever. The audio quality of those have gotten better, and the size of the microphones has like dramatically changed, where sometimes they're like super small, like little lobs that we call them. You can like hide them in the hair or on a hat or inside a vase or something like that in order to capture good quality audio. So like the technology of that has changed quite a bit. But once again, there's just like in videography, there are these key things that kind of hold true today that have always held true, as far as just like how to capture audio, like proper levels, metering, and all of those things that kind of go into it. It really kind of transcends, and there's so many other like jobs now with audio that maybe were pretty specialized even 20 years ago, where maybe you only did radio production or something like that, and now there are podcasts, and anybody can do a podcast now, and there's like just incredible tools out there that are free that you can use and download in order to record a podcast or record your own guitar solo or anything along those lines. So like that technology has really changed, and it's pretty exciting what you can do with so little.
Yes, and it looked like maybe in the video soundboards, how do you even go about knowing what all the dials and the knobs and the everything on there? Deb, how do you even begin to kind of understand how to learn that, how to become a pro, or have a pathway towards that, given that it looks very complex?
It is very complex. And I think there's a lot to learn about those big boards. If you looked close at that, you might have seen some tape with writing on it. Many of the audio operators label their what we call audio pots, so they remember this is mic 1, mic 2. But I think our audio guys get most excited when that board is pushed to the limit. They love to have a music event where there's 40 mics and they have to monitor all that. They totally geek out over that. They love that. And so those big boards do look intimidating, but the profession is something where they can not only are the pots going up and down, but there's little tweak knobs that it's a lot. And I am the worst at audio of all my talents. I rely on those engineers to sweeten audio, and oftentimes to fix things that I messed up in the field. The wind was really strong and I need them to go back and take that wind out, and they can do some of that. So yeah, they are absolutely fantastic technicians.
Do either one of you know of like any apps, or I'm thinking of students that are watching this and they're thinking, well, that sounds very exciting, but obviously I don't have access to a big soundboard. Are there any apps, because that seems to be like one of the biggest things, or different tools or techniques to any of the things that we've seen today to help students get that jump start? Cameron?
Yeah, I mean, if you buy like a MacBook, like, pretty cheap, or if your parents have one, it comes with a software called GarageBand, which is honestly 90% of like what we have here for software. I mean, it's, obviously we have the big professional thing, but it's a condensed down version that does almost everything. And it's a great tool to just plug in a microphone into the headphone jack and start recording something. And then just the beautiful thing is you can just start playing. So if you don't understand what EQ is or what compression is, just search YouTube and you'll find somebody who knows what they're talking about and can guide you through those steps in order to manipulate the audio to make it sound as, cool as possible.
Yes, it's exciting. And you talked about maybe doing the mixing of sounds, like the speaking portion, mixing in some music to that, or kind of combining that. So what are some advantages of doing that to the final piece of the production aspect?
I mean, there's a lot of like documentaries out there that do a great job, and there's like no music whatsoever. They just use like nat sound or anything. But sometimes like a piece does need music, and a piece, if it's mixed into into your piece well, can help create pacing. It can help elicit an emotion that may not be there when you're just visually watching something. Like that stuff can help bridge two elements together where we go from inside to outside, and it's just two random separate things, and music can kind of bridge that. So, I mean, all those like little audio elements, there's like so many little tricks that you can kind of play with in order to help convey emotion or an idea as you're editing.
Yeah. And you kind of talked about earlier, Deb, that you're always learning along with your current position. You talked about subtle differences between two software programs. How is that, or what role does learning new technology really play into your profession?
It's huge. It is huge. There are so many fast changes happening with technology, and then so interpreting those into how to tell a better story, or those tools you might have never had access to that you now do. How do I use them? And how will they affect my story? And I'll be quite honest with you. I pick Cameron's brain all the time. Cameron is a lifelong learner just by character, and he will read all the journals and see the news updates, and many times have ideas on how to kind of translate that into what we do. So it's super important to keep up to date. And I think you have to be this profession. You have to relish that, and really, really want to make changes. You have to like change, because it happens a lot in our industry.
Great. Well, we're about reaching the end of our time, but I want to give you each a final second or two to talk about what advice you have to any of our viewers watching, or really why they should consider a career like you guys have. So we'll start with Cameron. What's your piece of advice to our listeners today?
One thing is learn to write. I mean, it's so important, and it helps you communicate and think through things in so many other ways. So I mean, I know like I do some writing, but like just write, read, and expose yourself to as much as you can possibly can, and never stop learning. If there's something that inspires you, dive into it and figure it out. I think that's really important.
And Deb, your final piece of advice for our viewers today?
I would say start to notice what you watch. When you watch whatever you are watching, how is it shot? How is it edited? If you had to turn the volume down, did it make more sense to you, less sense to you? What are you seeing lighting wise? How do you think they captured it? Pay attention to what you watch and why that entertains you. And I think that would be something that helps you to figure out if you might have a passion for or a knack for doing this type of job. And it is actually all of the jobs at Iowa PBS, I would say, are a great combination of creative and technical. So if you have kind of both right brain and left brain going on, I think it's a good fit for you.
Well, thank you so much, Deb and Cameron and Iowa PBS for allowing us this opportunity to talk about career pathways behind the green screen. If you'd like to have more future videos about career pathways, make sure you tune in to iowain.org and check out all of our recordings for different career pathways. So again, thank you, Cameron and Deb and Iowa PBS, and we look forward to chatting with you another time.